She kicked out on Christmas by in-laws, mistakenly texted the Mafia boss for help. The snow fell silently over the city that night, blanketing the streets in a soft white layer that seemed to mute every sound. Streetlights glimmered like frozen stars, reflecting in puddles half hidden under ice. Yet inside the grand mansion on the hill, Isabella felt no warmth. The glittering Christmas decorations and the aroma of baked pies did nothing to ease the cold in her heart. She stood near the doorway, her breath visible in the frosty air as her in-laws' voices rose behind her. "Isabella, you always embarrass us," her mother-in-law snapped, her voice sharp as icicles. "Even today, on Christmas, you cannot behave like a proper daughter-in-law." Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the edges of her coat. Her husband, Andrew, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. He always said nothing. His silence had become its own kind of cruelty. I didn't mean to," Isabella whispered, her voice small. She tried to keep it calm, tried to keep the dignity she had once thought she possessed, but it was slipping like sand through her fingers. Her father-in-law's deep voice rumbled, cold and unyielding. "We have been patient, Isabella, too patient. Tonight you have shown us your limits. You will leave, now." Her heart froze. Leave on Christmas night. Alone in the snow with nothing but the clothes on her back. She swallowed hard, the sting of tears threatening to fall. She had tried to please them, tried to smile at their jokes, tried to laugh at the forced cheer of their Christmas party. And yet nothing had been enough. "Please, just let me stay for tonight," Isabella pleaded, her voice breaking. "I'll leave in the morning. I won't cause any trouble." But Andrew's parents exchanged a glance that spoke louder than words. There was no compromise here. The cold finality in their eyes made her stomach twist. "Enough," her mother-in-law said sharply. "You are gone." Isabella felt the words like a physical blow. She nodded silently, unable to argue further. The snow outside seemed to beckon her, indifferent and cruel. She gathered her coat around her and stepped out into the freezing night, the mansion's warmth and light disappearing behind her. The city streets were empty, the soft crunch of snow under her boots the only sound. She walked without direction, her fingers numb, her cheeks burning from the cold. Her mind raced. Where would she go? Who could she call? She pulled out her phone, hoping for some connection to the world that didn't feel so hostile. She meant to text a friend, someone who might understand, someone who could offer shelter for a few hours. But in her trembling fingers, she mistyped the number. The message left her phone before she could correct it. I need help. Please, anyone. I'm outside in the cold and I don't know where to go." She didn't realize she had sent it to the wrong number until the reply came. A chill ran down her spine, even beyond the cold of the snow. The message was short, commanding, almost sharp. "Meet me, now." Her hands shook. The number belonged to Lorenzo D'Angelo. She had heard of him, of course. Everyone had. The city whispered his name in fear and respect. A man who controlled more than the authorities, a man whose influence stretched in every shadowed corner of the city. A mafia boss, a figure of power, danger, and legend. And now he was asking her to meet him. Her mind screamed that it was a mistake. She should run, hide, turn back to the cold streets where at least no one knew who she was. But something, desperation perhaps, or a flicker of hope, made her obey. She followed the vague directions in his reply, the city lights blurring through her tears and the falling snow. Her heart pounded in her chest, each step echoing her fear and curiosity. The world she knew had rejected her. Perhaps, somewhere in this dangerous man's realm, she could find a chance, if only a small one, to survive the night. The car waited at the edge of an empty alley, sleek, black, silent. The engine purred softly as he stepped out, tall and imposing, dressed in dark tailored clothes. His hair was perfectly combed, his eyes sharp, scanning, calculating. When they met hers, she felt both a chill and a warmth she could not name. "Isabella," he said, his voice low and commanding. "You are far from safe out here." She nodded, unable to find her voice. He did not wait for her response. With a single hand he gestured, and she moved toward the car, the warmth of the interior immediately contrasting the bitter cold she had just endured. Inside, he offered her a blanket and a glass of water. He did not smile. He did not attempt to soften the edges of his presence. And yet there was a subtle intensity in his gaze that made her pulse race. "You sent me a message," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself as much as to her. "Tell me why." I didn't mean to," Isabella stammered, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It was a mistake. I didn't know where else to turn." He regarded her in silence for a moment that felt like a test. His eyes, dark and penetrating, seemed to look past her words into her very soul. Then, with a tilt of his head, he spoke. "You are not safe," he repeated. "Not tonight, not with them still watching." Her stomach twisted. Somehow he knew. Somehow he knew her in-laws would not let this end quietly. The thought sent fear racing through her, but she also felt a strange flicker of trust. She had no choice. In this man, this stranger, lay her only protection. The car moved through the streets like a shadow. Isabella did not ask questions. She could see the city lights flash past the windows, feel the heat from the engine, and hear the faint sound of snow being disturbed as they passed. Each moment brought her closer to a world she did not understand, a world of danger and power, yet also of possibility. Finally, they arrived at a tall, stone estate on the edge of the city. Snow clung to the black iron gates, sparkling in the faint glow of lanterns. Lorenzo opened the car door for her, and she stepped out, feeling small against the towering walls, against the dark majesty of the place. Inside, the estate was both beautiful and intimidating. Dark wooden beams, candlelight flickering against the stone walls, and paintings of past generations watching silently from their frames. Isabella's heart raced as she realized just how far she had stepped from her familiar world. "You will be safe here tonight," Lorenzo said, his voice steady and firm. "But understand, this protection comes at a cost. You are my guest, but not my possession. Respect my rules and you will not be harmed. Break them and—" His words trailed off, leaving the threat unspoken but understood. I understand," Isabella whispered. Her voice was quiet, but inside, a fire began to kindle. She had been helpless all her life, pushed and dismissed by people who should have cared for her. Tonight, she had stepped into another world, a world that terrified her, and yet offered a strange promise of power she had never known she could wield. She was led to a room warmed by a glowing fireplace. The walls were lined with books and artifacts, a collection of beauty and history that spoke of intellect and wealth. Lorenzo gave her a nod before leaving, and the door closed, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Alone, but for the first time not entirely defenseless. She wrapped the blanket tighter and sat near the fire, letting its warmth seep into her frozen limbs. Her mind replayed the events of the evening, her in-laws' cruelty, Andrew's silence, the snow, the cold, the fear, and the message that had led her here. Her fingers trembled again as she picked up her phone. A new message blinked on the screen. "Do not trust anyone who thinks they can control you. Stay here. I will handle the rest." Her breath caught. Somehow, this man she did not know had already become more than a stranger. There was a strange intensity in his words, a promise that unsettled her even as it reassured her. She did not know if she was ready for the world he lived in, but perhaps, for the first time, she was ready to step into it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in white silence. Inside, a small fire crackled, and a woman who had been abandoned by her own family began to feel a spark of hope. Yet the danger was real. She could not forget the shadow of her in-laws, the threat that had followed her even to this haven, and she did not yet know that this was only the beginning. A faint noise outside the window made her heart jump. She pressed herself closer to the firelight, straining her ears. A figure moved just beyond the shadows, watching. Not her imagination, someone was out there. Someone connected to her past, someone who would not let her go easily. Her pulse quickened. This was the reality she had stepped into, a world of power, danger, and unexpected protection. She had left the cold streets, but safety was never certain. And in that moment, wrapped in warmth yet haunted by fear, Isabella realized that her life had changed forever. Tonight she had no family, no one to protect her but herself, and a dangerous, compelling stranger whose motives she could not yet understand. And the message lingered in her mind, chilling and yet strangely reassuring. Meet me. Now she had met him. And now there was no turning back. The snowstorm outside raged on, swirling against the windows of Lorenzo D'Angelo's grand estate. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace cast flickering shadows across the tall, ornate walls. Isabella sat near the hearth, the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, yet she could not shake the tension that had settled deep in her chest. Every crackle of the fire, every whisper of wind against the walls made her flinch. The knock at the door earlier had left her unsettled. Lorenzo, however, had already gone to investigate. Moments later, he returned, his expression calm but alert, as though he had expected the shadow of danger to follow her into his home. "You must stay close to me tonight," he said, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. "I will not allow anyone to harm you under my roof." Isabella swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the words caught in her throat. There was an intensity about him, a presence that made it impossible to feel entirely safe and impossible to look away. "Where, where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice small but steady. "To the inner rooms," Lorenzo replied. "Somewhere safe, somewhere no one can reach us tonight." He moved with fluid precision, leading her down a dimly lit corridor lined with ancient paintings and heavy drapes. The house was like a fortress, every corner imbued with a sense of careful control. Isabella noticed the subtle security measures, the locks, the guards stationed at discrete points, and the intricate network of hallways that seemed almost like a labyrinth. As they reached a smaller, secluded chamber, Lorenzo turned to her. "This room is off-limits to anyone except myself. Here, you will be safe until the storm passes." The room was modest compared to the grandeur of the rest of the estate. Shelves of books lined one wall, and a soft rug covered the stone floor. A fire burned gently in a small hearth, casting a comforting glow. Isabella felt a strange relief as she stepped inside. For the first time since leaving her in-laws' mansion, she felt she might actually be protected. Yet fear lingered. I don't understand why you're helping me," she admitted quietly. "I'm just someone who made a mistake." Lorenzo's eyes softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "Mistakes have consequences. You are here because the consequences could have been far worse. You have no one else to turn to, but you have courage, even if you do not realize it." Isabella blinked, taken aback. Courage. She felt far from courageous. Yet there was something in his gaze that made her consider that perhaps he saw more than she allowed herself to see. "Courage doesn't mean you are not afraid," Lorenzo continued. "It means you act despite the fear." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. There was wisdom in them and yet a warning. She realized that the world she had stepped into was not simple, and that the man before her was not ordinary. He commanded respect and demanded obedience, but not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Before she could reply, a soft chime sounded from the room's small communication device. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed as he read the message. "They have found you," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then he looked at her. "Your in-laws, they will not leave this alone. They are determined to take you back." Isabella's heart sank. She had known this might happen, yet hearing it confirmed made her fear spike. What will they do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They will try anything," Lorenzo replied, "but I will not let them." There was a pause as he studied her face. For the first time, he allowed a hint of vulnerability to show, a crack in the otherwise impenetrable wall of control he always carried. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but Isabella noticed. And in that moment, she felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. The silence between them was broken by a sudden, sharp noise from outside the room. Both instinctively turned toward the sound. Lorenzo's hand moved toward the concealed weapon at his side, not in threat to her but in readiness to defend. "You must stay behind me," he said softly. "Whatever comes, I will handle it. Do not move unless I tell you." Isabella obeyed, her body tense as the seconds stretched. The snowstorm outside muffled most sounds, but she could hear the faintest movements, footsteps, whispers, a shadow slipping across the hall. Her pulse raced. Minutes later, Lorenzo returned to the room, his calm demeanor restored. "They are testing the estate," he explained. "Scouts trying to find a way in, they will not succeed." Isabella exhaled slowly, her shoulders loosening. I don't know how to thank you," she admitted. "You need not thank me," he said. "Tonight you are my responsibility, that is enough." She studied him in silence. There was something magnetic about the way he carried himself, powerful yet controlled, dangerous yet protective. She realized that fear and trust were entwined in a way she had never experienced before. Over the next hours, Isabella found herself observing Lorenzo more closely. He moved through the estate with quiet authority, checking the security systems, scanning the perimeter, always alert. And yet, there were moments when his gaze softened, when he paused to ensure she was comfortable, when he allowed a hint of humor to escape in a quiet smile. It was in those small moments that Isabella felt a strange pull toward him. She had been alone in the world, pushed and dismissed by those who should have cared for her. Here was a man who, despite his formidable reputation, seemed to see her, not as a possession, not as a mistake, but as a person. The storm outside continued to rage, snow piling against the windows, the wind howling like a chorus of whispers. Inside, the fire's glow created a fragile bubble of warmth and safety. Yet Isabella knew that the danger had not passed. Every shadow, every distant sound reminded her that her life had changed in a single night. Eventually, Lorenzo returned to the room carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. He handed one to her, his hands brushing hers briefly, sending a small, unfamiliar warmth through her chest. "Drink," he instructed softly. "You need to stay strong. The night is not yet over." Isabella nodded, lifting the cup to her lips. The warmth spread through her, a small comfort against the chill that lingered in her bones. She glanced at Lorenzo, noticing the quiet intensity in his eyes. He was not smiling, yet she felt a strange sense of reassurance in his presence. "You do not speak much," he observed after a moment. "Why?" I am not used to people like you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "People who protect, even when they could ignore." Lorenzo tilted his head, studying her. "Protection is not given lightly. It must be earned. And yet, there are some who require it whether they ask or not." Isabella felt her chest tighten. She realized that she was one of those people. She had stumbled into a world she did not understand, yet here she was, being protected by a man she barely knew, but somehow she trusted him. Hours passed. The storm began to subside, but the tension remained. Isabella could not sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of what had brought her here and what lay ahead. Lorenzo, sensing her unrest, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are safe for now," he said, "but you must remain cautious. The night is not over and threats linger." She nodded, grateful for the reassurance, yet aware that the danger was real. She had been rejected by her family, pushed into the cold and darkness, and now she had found herself in a world of shadows and power. Yet in this room, with Lorenzo watching over her, she felt a flicker of hope she had not known in years. "Will they come?" she asked quietly. "They will try," Lorenzo replied, "but I will not let them take you." The words were firm, yet there was something else beneath them, a promise, a warning, a silent understanding of the risks they both faced. Isabella realized that she had entered a new reality, one in which her life and her choices were intertwined with a man of immense power. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the heavy drapes, Isabella felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. The night had been long, filled with uncertainty and tension, yet she had survived. And she had not survived alone. Lorenzo, standing near the hearth, observed her with a quiet intensity. "The world outside will not wait for you to be ready," he said. "You must be ready to face it, and you must be ready to face yourself." Isabella nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She had been cast out, humiliated, and abandoned. Yet here, in the warmth of the fire and the strength of Lorenzo's presence, she felt the first stirrings of her own courage. The snow outside glistened in the morning light, beautiful yet treacherous. And Isabella knew that the challenges ahead would be greater than anything she had faced before. But for the first time in her life, she did not feel entirely alone. And she did not yet realize that the events of this night would set in motion a chain of events that would change her life and her heart forever. Cliffhanger. As she sipped her tea, a subtle noise from the estate's outer perimeter caught Lorenzo's attention. He moved toward the window, narrowing his eyes. Shadows flitted in the distance. Isabella's pulse quickened. The storm had passed, but a new threat had arrived. Someone was watching, and they were closer than anyone realized. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the heavy gray clouds as Isabella gazed out of the tall window of Lorenzo's estate. The snow that had fallen during the storm now lay in thick blankets across the gardens, glistening like diamonds under the weak light. Everything seemed still, peaceful even, but Isabella knew better. Danger lingered, invisible yet constant, like a shadow at the edge of vision. Her thoughts drifted back to the night before, the sudden rejection from her in-laws, the cold streets, the accidental message, and the arrival of Lorenzo. She had never imagined that a single mistake could lead to being thrust into a world so different from her own, a world of power, of danger, and yet a strange sense of protection she had never felt before. Lorenzo was not a man who smiled often. His presence was commanding, almost overwhelming, but there was something quietly magnetic about him. Last night, she had seen the briefest flashes of softness beneath his composed exterior, small gestures that hinted at a complexity she could not yet fully understand. She shivered slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The fire in the room provided warmth, but it could not ease the tension in her heart. Lorenzo's warning rang in her ears. The night is not over, and threats linger. Her reverie was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Lorenzo stepped in, his expression sharp, eyes scanning the room as if he could sense her thoughts. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "Sleep well." I think so," Isabella replied, her voice uncertain. "But I can't stop thinking, what if they come for me?" Lorenzo approached and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The contact sent a strange warmth through her chest. "They will try," he said, "but you are not alone. And neither will I let them succeed." Isabella looked up at him, noticing the way his dark eyes softened, even as his stance remained firm. There was a quiet intensity in him that made her feel both safe and aware of how small she was in the presence of his power. She had never felt so simultaneously protected and exposed. Do you always do this?" she asked hesitantly. "Protect people you barely know?" Lorenzo's gaze met hers. "I protect what matters," he replied. "Tonight that includes you. Tomorrow we will see." Isabella felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe admiration. She realized that she was slowly beginning to see him not just as a powerful, intimidating figure, but as a man with depth, with rules he followed and convictions he held. The morning passed quietly at first. Lorenzo guided Isabella through the estate, showing her rooms she hadn't yet seen, places of beauty and history, each one carefully curated to reflect not just wealth, but intellect and strategy. She noticed the subtle security measures hidden in plain sight: cameras, locks, reinforced windows. Everything spoke of a man who anticipated danger and controlled it, and yet somehow he still extended trust to her. Lunch was served in a small, sunlit room. Lorenz allowed her to choose her food, a simple gesture that made her heart flutter despite the seriousness of their situation. She found herself stealing glances at him, noticing how his jaw tightened slightly as he studied a letter from an unknown source, likely her in-laws, delivered earlier that morning. "They are persistent," he said quietly, without looking up. "They believe they have the right to control you. They do not." Isabella felt a surge of both fear and gratitude. This man, who commanded fear and respect across the city, spoke her truth with such certainty. She realized that in his presence, she could begin to reclaim some of her lost strength. The afternoon brought news that her in-laws had escalated their efforts. A messenger had arrived at the estate, demanding that Isabella return immediately or face consequences. Lorenzo read the message calmly, then tore it into pieces, letting the fragments drift into the fireplace. "They will try other methods," he said, "but they will fail. You must remain vigilant." Isabella's chest tightened. She had been running all her life, from criticism, from cruelty, from disappointment. Yet here she was confronted with a choice: continue hiding or step into a world where her courage and determination could matter. As the day waned, Lorenzo suggested a walk through the gardens. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and the cold air stung their cheeks. Isabella felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. The danger, the unfamiliarity, and the sense of being seen all combined to create an electric tension. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly, unable to contain her curiosity. Lorenzo paused, his dark eyes studying her against the backdrop of snow and twilight. "Because sometimes people need someone to see their worth," he said. "And sometimes someone needs a reason to care again." Isabella felt a flutter in her chest. His words were both cryptic and intimate, hinting at hidden pain and perhaps loneliness beneath his carefully constructed exterior. She realized that this man, who seemed so untouchable, might be more human than she expected. As they walked, a sudden noise interrupted their thoughts. A figure moved at the edge of the garden, cloaked in shadow, trying to remain unnoticed. Isabella's heart jumped. "They are here," she whispered. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. He moved silently, positioning himself between Isabella and the potential threat. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice calm but commanding. "Do not move." The figure hesitated, then retreated, clearly recognizing that they were detected. Lorenzo's hand remained near the concealed weapon at his side, his stance protective and ready. "You see," he said quietly, turning toward her, "they will not stop easily, but neither will we." Isabella nodded, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her. She realized that she was no longer simply a victim. She was learning to observe, to anticipate, to trust her instincts, and to trust Lorenzo. The rest of the afternoon passed with careful vigilance. Lorenzo allowed her small freedoms. She could move through the estate under his watchful eye, read in the library, even practice walking the halls with confidence. And yet, the tension never fully lifted. Every sound, every shadow, reminded her that her life had changed in ways she could not yet control. By evening, Isabella felt both exhausted and alive. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and her own self-doubt and survived. And she had begun to recognize a strange, growing connection with Lorenzo, not just as a protector, but as someone who saw her in a way no one else ever had. Dinner was quiet. The fire in the dining room cast warm light across the polished wood table. Isabella ate slowly, savoring the meal, while Lorenzo observed her in silence. Occasionally their eyes met, and in those moments she felt a silent conversation passing between them, words unspoken, feelings unacknowledged but understood. After dinner, Lorenzo suggested they return to the study. Isabella hesitated, sensing the intimacy of the moment, but she followed him anyway, curiosity stronger than caution. The study was lined with books and artifacts, a place of knowledge and reflection. Lorenzo gestured for her to sit. "You need to understand this world," he said. "Knowledge is as powerful as strength. You cannot rely on me forever." Isabella listened intently as he spoke of strategy, protection, and influence. She realized that surviving in this world would require more than courage. It would require awareness, intelligence, and careful thought. Hours passed. Isabella felt her mind sharpen, her confidence grow. And she felt something else too, a deepening respect, a growing fascination with the man who had taken her in, protected her, and yet remained an enigma. As the night deepened, Lorenzo moved closer, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. "You have changed already," he said softly. "You are no longer the frightened woman I found in the snow. You are learning to stand." Isabella felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride and something more tender. She realized that she was beginning to trust him, not blindly but carefully and with growing hope. The peace was shattered by a sudden, sharp noise from outside the estate. Lorenzo's eyes snapped to the window, dark and focused. Isabella's pulse quickened. The first direct threat had arrived. "They are testing us," Lorenzo said, his voice steady. "But now we must act." He moved to the door, gesturing for Isabella to stay behind him. Her hands trembled, but she obeyed, feeling both fear and an unfamiliar thrill. This was no longer just about survival. It was about courage, action, and the realization that she could contribute to her own protection. Minutes later, the figure outside retreated, unsuccessful in their attempt. Lorenzo exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders, but his eyes remained watchful. "You see," he said quietly, turning toward her, "they will keep coming, but we will meet each challenge together. You will not be alone." Isabella nodded, a sense of determination rising within her. For the first time, she felt that she could face the world, not as a helpless victim, but as someone who had strength, courage, and a powerful ally at her side. As the fire crackled, the snow glimmering outside, Isabella realized something profound. She was no longer running. She was no longer simply surviving. She was beginning to live. And the bond between her and Lorenzo, forged in fear and protection, was beginning to thaw, revealing a connection that neither of them had fully understood, but that neither could ignore. Cliffhanger: just as Isabella began to feel a fragile sense of safety, a faint shadow moved near the gates of the estate. She glanced at Lorenzo and his eyes narrowed. "They are back," he whispered. "And this time they will not fail." The night had fallen once more over the estate, but this time it felt different. The storm had passed days ago, yet the air carried a sharp edge, a reminder that danger was never far. Isabella stood at the window of her room, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on her face. Outside, the snow sparkled faintly under the moonlight, calm in appearance but treacherous beneath its beauty. Her mind raced with the events of the past days. She had arrived at Lorenzo's estate a frightened, humiliated woman, cast out by her own family on the coldest night of the year. And now, after nights of tension, threat, and learning, she was no longer that same person. The fear that had once dominated her had been tempered by courage and trust, and more than anything by Lorenzo. He had become more than a protector. He had become someone whose presence she could not ignore, whose words stirred feelings she could not yet name, whose strength inspired her to believe in herself. Her reflection in the window caught her attention. She saw a woman who was tired but determined, shaken but resilient, scared yet aware of her own power. Isabella took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her transformation. A sudden noise broke her reverie. Soft at first, then louder, the unmistakable crunch of boots on snow. Isabella's heart leapt. She moved quickly to the door, glancing toward the hallway. Lorenzo was already there, his dark coat flowing as he moved with precision, alertness sharp as a blade. "They're here," he said quietly, almost to himself, eyes scanning the shadows. Prepare yourself. Isabella nodded. Her hands were steady now, her fear tempered by resolve. She had been trained, in a sense, by the nights of threat and the days of observation. She would not be helpless. Lorenzo led her to the main hall, the grand chamber that overlooked the estate's gates. Snow drifted against the windows, but beyond it, figures moved. Her in-laws and their hired men, shadows intent on reclaiming what they believed was theirs. "They have underestimated you," Lorenzo said, his voice calm but charged with authority. "And they will soon understand the mistake they made." Isabella's pulse quickened, but this time with determination rather than panic. She felt the fire of defiance, the courage that had begun to grow within her, and the trust in Lorenzo who stood as her shield. The confrontation began quietly. A single figure approached the gates, testing their defenses. Lorenzo stepped forward, his presence commanding. "You will not cross here," he declared. His voice carried through the night, deep and unwavering, a warning and a challenge. The figure faltered, recognizing the authority in his tone. But more came, larger forces, determined, relentless. Isabella could see the resolve in their stance. Her in-laws had brought everything they could muster to force her return. "Stay behind me," Lorenzo instructed, his hand brushing hers briefly, a touch that carried both reassurance and an unspoken bond. Isabella nodded, feeling strength in the connection. The battle was not one of violence alone, but of strategy and will. Lorenzo moved with precision, directing Isabella and the few trusted allies he had stationed throughout the estate. She watched closely, learning to anticipate moves, to read intentions, to act with quiet courage. A shadow moved toward a side entrance. Isabella instinctively moved, guided by Lorenzo's earlier teachings. She intercepted it, using a distraction technique Lorenzo had shown her. The intruder stumbled, caught off guard. Isabella's heart raced, but she felt exhilaration. She was no longer helpless. She was participating, protecting herself and the man who had trusted her. Lorenzo observed her with keen eyes. For a fleeting moment, the usual mask of his stoicism softened. He allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile, acknowledging her growth. "You've learned well," he murmured under his breath. The night escalated into a tense standoff. Her in-laws, realizing that their attempts were failing, tried to intimidate and manipulate. But Isabella, standing beside Lorenzo, felt a strength she had never known. Her voice was steady, firm when she confronted them. "I am not yours to command," she declared. "I am not a mistake, and I will not be controlled. You have no power over me anymore." Her words struck like lightning. Lorenzo's presence reinforced her, a shadowed guardian whose calm authority amplified her courage. Her in-laws faltered, unprepared for the fire in her tone and the resolute force beside her. Moments later, the confrontation reached its climax. Lorenzo stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. "Leave," he commanded. "This estate is no place for cruelty or fear. Take your threats and go." For the first time, Isabella witnessed the full weight of his power, not just in physical or organizational terms, but in the quiet authority of his words, the inevitability of his will. Her in-laws retreated, their defiance broken, leaving the snow-covered ground silent once more. Isabella turned to Lorenzo, her chest still racing. We did it," she whispered, disbelief mingling with relief. He gave her a small nod, his gaze lingering on her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "No," he corrected softly. "You did it. You found your strength." The acknowledgement struck her deeply. For so long she had felt powerless, dismissed, and ignored. But here, in the aftermath of danger, she realized that she had been transformed. She had faced fear, stood her ground, and survived. They returned to the warmth of the estate, the fire now a comforting presence rather than a small solace. Isabella felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration, a strange peace settling over her as the night deepened. Lorenzo watched her from across the room, his usual stoicism softened by a rare vulnerability. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly. and perhaps stronger than even I expected. Isabella felt her cheeks warm. I never would have known without you, she admitted. He approached her slowly, eyes dark and searching. Perhaps, he said, but strength also comes from trust, and you have trusted me. That is how we face the night, and that is how we will face the future. Her heart beat faster. Trust was something she had rarely given freely, yet with him it had been instinctive. She realized that their connection went beyond survival. It was a bond forged in fear, in courage, and in quiet understanding. For the first time, Isabella allowed herself to see him not just as a protector, but as a man who had shared danger, knowledge, and the rarest form of respect. A man who had challenged her, guided her, and inspired her. The moments passed, quiet but heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Lorenzo extended his hand, an invitation both literal and symbolic. Isabella took it, feeling the warmth and reassurance of his touch. "You have changed," he murmured, a faint edge of emotion in his tone. "And I have seen it." She smiled softly, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something deeper she could not yet name. "And you," she asked, "have you changed?" His eyes met hers, intense and unflinching. "Perhaps," he said quietly. "Perhaps you have reminded me that even in a world of power and danger, there is room for trust, for courage, and for connection." The snow outside glimmered in the moonlight, peaceful now, yet reminding them of the fragility of safety. Isabella realized that life would always carry challenges, threats, and uncertainty. But she had discovered her own strength, and she had found someone beside her who valued it, respected it, and honored her courage. They stood together hand in hand in the quiet warmth of the estate. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows, a reflection of the journey they had traveled, the cold streets, the storm, the danger, the trust, the growth. "You are safe here," Lorenzo said softly, "and I will not let anything take that away." Isabella took a deep breath, feeling a sense of finality and new beginnings. "And I will not let fear control me anymore," she replied. "Not tonight, not ever again." The night stretched around them, filled with the quiet promise of what was possible. Isabella felt a lightness she had never known, a sense that she had stepped out of the shadows of her past and into a world where she could finally breathe, hope, and even love. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. "You've done more than survive," he said quietly. "You have transformed, and in doing so, you have shown me something I thought I had lost." Her eyes met his, and in that gaze, words were unnecessary. They had both endured, both changed, both discovered courage, and both recognized a connection that neither could deny. Outside, the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. Snow shimmered, the world bathed in a soft glow. Inside, Isabella and Lorenzo stood together, two figures shaped by fear, power, and trust, ready to face whatever came next, side by side.